Thank you and welcome everybody. Welcome to Pearson EdXL's GCSE History network session on teaching and assessing interpretations. Just having a look in the chat. Thank you to those people who have dropped some ideas of what they are hoping to get from the session today. Looks like so far, the main focus is kind of structure and what the examiner will be looking for in questions 3C and 3D. And just to reassure you, we will be coming to those questions this evening. Okay, so welcome to this training session, as I say, on teaching and assessing interpretations. It's a focus on paper 3. We're going to recap briefly on the assessment model for interpretations on paper 3. If you're experienced teachers of Pearson EdXL's GCSE history, you will know that it's paper 3 where interpretations are assessed. So today we will consider what went well in 2024 and where there is room for improvement across each of the question types. We will do this by looking at some exemplar student scripts. And then we'll end the session today thinking about some strategies that you can use in your classroom for teaching interpretations. And we will conclude with a chance to share some best practice and ask questions. As I've just been introduced, my name is Sam Slater. I'm a head of history, an experienced examiner, author, and I work as a Pearson GCSE history subject specialist. So I'm here to present the network session for you this evening, and I'm happy to look at some of the questions in the chat and answer the questions as we go. Just so you are aware, we also have both of the marks with us this evening, who will also monitor the Q&A and the chat function and get back to you if I'm busy kind of working through the slides. So as we've been told, all of these resources are available to you. You will have a copy of the presentation. At a later date, you'll be sent a copy of the recording, and you should have a copy of our delegate booklet that we will be using this evening. So as I say, throughout this presentation, we're going to think about how interpretations are assessed across paper 3, what the students have done well in the past, and where we feel there's room for improvement, some strategies that we can use for teaching interpretations to help our students improve in the upcoming exams, to consider some common issues. And as I say, please drop your questions in the chat and we will get to them between the three of us. So let's kick off then. Let's get started because we only have an hour this evening. And I'm sure if any of you are like me, if you've got any heads of department in the room when we're sitting down talking about paper 3 and interpretations, the conversation could go on for longer than an hour. So we will get started. So as I say, focusing on paper 3. And this slide here is a good reminder, reminding us that across the whole GCSE, the analysis, evaluation of interpretations, the making substantiated judgments about interpretations, how and why interpretations differ in the context of historical events makes up 15% of the overall marks. And as I've said, the assessment of interpretations takes place in paper 3. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, but question 3B, 3C, 3D, there is a linked approach to those questions, which we will come back to in later slides. And you will find these questions on paper 3 where students are asked to look at 2 interpretations, to say what the main difference is between the views, to suggest one reason why interpretations 1 and 2 give different views, and then to evaluate how far they agree with interpretation 2 about the focus of that interpretation. So this is just a reminder of where those 15% of the marks kind of appear on paper 3, and there we are, section B. So interpretations then, AO4, interpretations of history. What does Pearson EdXL mean by an interpretation? And I think it's really important that we as teachers have this clear in our heads so that we can then pass this information on to our students through our teaching. So here we have the definition that is used by Pearson Edexcel. An interpretation is an attempt to portray and or make meaning of the past using evidence. It's a deliberate construct created after the event. It can include both academic and non-academic interpretations. And I just want to pause on that phrase there. It can include both academic and non-academic interpretations. What Edexcel mean here by non-academic, in practice there, it could be an extract from a textbook, could be an extract from a history website that is not authored by recognised academics. What we're not going to find in our exam papers, what Edexcel is not going to use, is examples of historical fiction or a representation, but it will be an attempt to write history. So if you're new to teaching the Pearson Edexcel GCSE, I do highly recommend that you use the past papers on the website for paper 3. You have a look back at some of the interpretations that have been used in previous exam papers. So as you know, question 3, and we will come back to this again, but question 3 on paper 3 combines the analysis of sources with interpretations. And I love this analogy. So do think about the questions in this way. The sources are the building blocks of the interpretation. So the sources are those pieces of Lego that are put together to create the interpretation. And then the interpretation is the view that is constructed from the evidence. So I think it's really important that we as teachers make those links between sources and interpretation so that we can share that with students, develop their understanding of how sources and interpretations are linked, so that they can understand how questions 3A to 3D are linked in their exam. This slide just gives you an extract here from the paper 3 guide, and this has been linked for you on the slide, so it will take you to the paper 3 guide, and you'll find this extract on page 13. And it's just a reminder here of Edexcel's advice regarding interpretations. So let's just take some time to have a think about this. Interpretations are secondary extracts. These are labelled interpretations to distinguish them clearly from the sources. And again, it's, if you're new to teaching this course, it's worth showing students the accompanying booklet that goes with paper 3 so that they can see source B, source C, and then interpretation 1 and interpretation 2, so that they distinguish between the sources and the interpretations and use them appropriately in their answers. Strictly speaking, these interpretations are secondary extracts, which could be said to offer an interpretation within them. At GCSE, at GCE, the term extract is used. The extracts may be interpretations of an aspect of the period taken from textbooks or from the writing of historians, suitably eased for accessibility. Where an extract is eased, the original meaning of the author will not be altered in the process. And as I say, there's a link here to a very useful guide. It's worth having another look over and will help you improve your understanding or develop your understanding, consolidate your understanding of the guidance on sources and interpretations. So let's jump to the chat. What I would like you to do, if you could just put in the chat for me, what challenges have you faced when preparing students for the interpretation questions? What changes have you made so far to overcome these challenges? So the first exam for this spec was 2018. What changes have you made over the years to overcome the challenges that your students face? And I will have a look at the chat and share some of these ideas with everybody. Okay. So yes, one of the challenges is the demands, the high literacy demand for students, especially with a lower reading age. 3C, thank you, Dawn. Students repeating what they've written for 3B. Yeah. Students having problems understanding why interpretations are different. I agree there. Some pupils refer to date and bias. Yes, I agree. And that's interesting, actually, Rebecca, isn't it? Because it's not something I do in my classroom, but it clearly is happening maybe in other subjects. So I think it's worth having a conversation with maybe some other subjects about that. That's something I've done in my school, which has helped. Student vocabulary, literacy, confusing interpretations with sources. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you give the 5-step process for lower ability. Okay, so we've certainly got some repetition here, some challenges regarding literacy levels. Hopefully I'll reassure you there later on in the session. We can come back to that. Oh, there's lots. I'm lost in the challenges, but it does seem to be literacy and some students struggling with explaining why interpretations are different. And not relying on the provenance for question 3C. Okay, lovely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for getting involved there. That's it's really important feedback for the session, but I also wanted to kind of reassure you that after the event, we do spend some time looking through the comments. We do take the comments, we do take the ideas that you share with us and plan future training and future support to help teachers. So, you know, please do get involved. Please do give us as much information in the chat as you can. And because, like I say, it will inform future support that we can give you. Okay, so let's get started then. Let's start having a look at some feedback from the 2024 exams and some of the exemplar answers and thinking about what examiners are looking for when they mark these questions and how we can then support the students. Now, as I was saying earlier in a couple of slides ago, we need to view question 3 as the inquiry package. Question 3A kind of begins the inquiry. If we think about those building blocks, again, students are looking at the building blocks. They are thinking about how useful the sources are for the inquiry. And that familiarises them with the sources. And then they move on to look at how the interpretations are different in 3B, 3C, why, 3D, then evaluating how far they agree with interpretation 2. So I'm not sure if you joined last week, but last week there was a Sources Network event. So we're not going to cover 3A in any detail this evening, but if you joined last week, hopefully you feel more confident on what the exam board are kind of looking for with the source utility question. If you missed that last week, don't worry. There is a recording and it will be available on the YouTube channel very soon. So yes, let's move on then and have a look at question 3B. Apologies. So we are thinking about how interpretations differ. In the exam, students will be given interpretation 1, interpretation 2, and they will be chosen because they will have a difference, at least one difference. And we'll come to that. So the students should or will always or should always be able to find a difference in view between the interpretations. So question 3A leads the candidates to think about the strengths and weaknesses of sources, source utility. And in 3B, to recognise that historians may validly reach different conclusions, possibly linked to the sources consulted or the focus of the research. So what we're thinking about here is that one event, one aspect of history can be viewed in 2 different ways. And we want the students to recognise that difference in view. The top marks for this question require explicit reference to the interpretations. The mark scheme for level 2 states, the interpretations are analysed, and a key difference of view is identified and supported from them. And what we found in 2024 is that many candidates scored the full 4 marks for question 3B. Those answers that failed to score the full 4 marks, there were some common problems. The common problems were that they were identifying the difference between the interpretations, but not supporting the explanation by referring to details from each interpretation. And I think, you know, the most obvious way of doing that is to quote, but they do need, you know, they don't have to quote, but that might be something you want to consider in your teaching, in, you know, teaching your students, kind of getting them into the habit of adding quotations, but they do need to support the explanation by referring to the details of each interpretation. Sometimes they summarise the view of each interpretation, but didn't explicitly identify the difference. And a few answers wrote about the sources instead of the interpretations. So let's rewind our minds back to last summer 2024, and we have here the question from paper 3, Germany question, summer 2024. Students were given 2 interpretations. You'll find these in your delegate booklet on page 1. The question was study interpretations 1 and 2. They give different views about Nazi methods of controlling the German people in the years 1933 to 39. What is the main difference between these views? And in summary, interpretation 1 kind of looks at the role of propaganda and selecting information to control the German people. And interpretation 2 looks at the role of the police state of terror in controlling the German people. And we've got here on the slide a copy of the mark scheme with the indicative content for this question. And you can see there the main difference is that interpretation 1 suggests the Nazis were able to control Germany through propaganda, which ensured that Nazi ideas were spread to the people. Interpretation 2, on the other hand, emphasises the Nazi creation of a police state using the law to control people's behaviour. And as I say, you'll find these page 1 and the mark scheme on page 2 of your delegate booklet. So here we have for question 3B, we have an exemplar answer 1 in your delegate booklet, which you will find on page 2. And this is an answer that scored 4 marks, level 2, 4 marks. And what you can see here, underlined in red, is the difference in view. I'm not going to read the whole answer to you, but you can see here this candidate identified that interpretation 1 was focused on using propaganda to get people to agree with Hitler, whereas interpretation 2 was focused on violence and the consequences of people not following the Nazis and interrogation there. So there is the difference here. And this has been supported with quotations from interpretation 1 and interpretation 2. And these are underlined in blue for you. So as I say, in your delegate booklet, page 2, you will see this exemplar answer, a good exemplar showing a 4 mark answer. Something that's really important to take note of here, and this is, hopefully this will help you with regards to what you were saying about literacy and students understanding the interpretations. The indicative content on the mark scheme is just that, it's indicative content. There is no specific difference that is required. It can be any valid difference in relation to the inquiry that the student can identify, analyse and exemplify. And it can be at any level of reading. So as long as the students identify a valid difference from the 2 interpretations and they support it with details from the interpretation, then they can score the marks. So what the students are thinking about is what difference can they identify and what information in the interpretation shows this difference. The difference doesn't have to be analytically complex at GCSE level. And I think this is a really good example of an answer that isn't overly analytical. This student has identified that one interpretation is referring to propaganda, one is referring to violence, and backs it up nicely with quotes from the interpretations. High attainers may find a more analytical approach, and that may help them later with question 3C and 3D. But this should be a question that all students have access to. And I am, when I'm teaching my year 11s, I am forever telling them this, that sometimes they really overcomplicate the difference that they're looking for. And I'm forever saying to them, don't ignore the obvious. Don't ignore the obvious difference. Put it down and support it with quotations. So hopefully that gives you some help there with question 3B. Just going to check the chat quickly. We'll come back to the essay, Anton, shortly. But if we just take this question first of all, and then I'll show you how a similar approach can be used in question 3D as well. The beauty of question 3D is that it's a very open question. And so students can access some marks, but we will come to that. Okay, so let's have a look at question 3C. The question that asks, we're looking at the same two interpretations, and students are asked, why are these two interpretations different? So the feedback from the year 2024 exam series, excuse me, question 3C is aimed at helping students to realise that historians can validly reach different conclusions. So again, we're coming back to that idea that they've identified in 3B, an event, a period of history, a part of history, two different interpretations. And now we want the students to think about, okay, how do historians get to two different interpretations, two different views? Many students scored 4 marks by explaining that the authors of the interpretations place weight on different sources. For full marks, this needs an explanation of the link between the interpretations and sources. And this must be supported with references to each interpretation and each source. Some answers explained that the authors had a different focus. For example, looking at political, social, or economic issues, different periods, or different groups in society. How this focus led to different views in the interpretations must be explained and supported. It is not enough to say the authors have focused on different things and repeat the difference identified in question 3B. So I think that came up in the chat there, trying to, getting students to avoid repeating their answer for question 3B. What they need to think about is thinking about how the focus led to different views and explaining that and supporting with detail from both interpretations. A few explained that the authors were intentionally writing from different perspectives. For example, attempting to explain success or failure. Again, this must be supported from the interpretations. And I do feel as a teacher and as someone who looks at a lot of the exemplar answers through the work that I'm doing this evening, that many students do find the first approach more accessible. So this is something that I would advise that you think about in your teaching. Other approaches may lead to a better discussion in question 3D, but the first approach kind of is the way that students kind of access the marks more easily on this question. It's important to note here that the suggestion that the difference can be accounted for by considering the date it was produced or the nationality of the author is not valid, and no marks can be given for answers assuming the authors were writing from their own experiences. This is very much a question where the students need to use the content of the interpretation to explain why they're different, which again goes back to the point I was just making, that by linking the content of the interpretation to the sources, I think is why many students find the first approach more accessible. So if we carry on and look at the demands of question 3C, the key point here is the recognition that the authors have chosen to present their information in a way that creates a certain impression. And I think it's really important to emphasize to your students when you're teaching interpretations that the authors have chosen to present this information in a certain way. They have chosen to emphasize the one aspect is the most important factor, or they have chosen to argue that something is more important than another. Encourage students to think about that active choice that historians and authors make. The reasons suggested must be supported from the interpretations. And if you have a look at level 2 in the mark scheme, and you'll find a copy of the mark scheme in your delegate booklet on page 3, you can see there the level 2 of the mark scheme says an explanation of a reason for difference is given, analysing the interpretations. So they need a clear reason for difference, analysing the interpretations, and then that explanation must be substantiated effectively. Apologies, I will get my words out. This means that whichever approach is used, explicit references to both interpretations must be used to support the explanation. And the table here that we've shared with you on this slide shows how the average marks do dip for question 3C compared to 3B, even to an extent among higher attaining students. And this pattern, although we've given you the marks here for Germany, this pattern is very similar on the other 3 options. But it's, again here, this shows that the questions are getting harder. This shows that it's a ramped question. We would expect higher marks on 3B because it's more straightforward than 3C. But it's something that we can consider in our teaching and consider how we can support students with developing this skill, this higher level skill than is required in question 3B. So let's return to last summer, 2024, and have a look at the question that was in the paper last summer. Again, as you know, you've got the interpretations in your delegate booklet, page 1, and the mark scheme on page 3. And we're working with the same interpretations, and we're working with these 3 kind of indicative content guidance on the mark scheme that historians or authors have given weight to different sources, or that the interpretations may differ because the authors have emphasized different techniques used to control the German people, or they may differ because the authors have a different approach to explaining Nazi policies. And let's have a look at this answer, which is exemplar answer 2 in your delegate booklet, and you will find this on page 4. Exemplar answer 2 on page 4. And here we can see an answer that uses that first approach, that authors have got different views because they have given weight to different sources. And this is an answer that scored level 1, 2 marks. And if you have a look here, it's got level 1, 2 marks because there is a reason for difference. It does say there, it's clear here that this student understands that the author of interpretation 1 has used sources such as source C or similar to source C, while the author of interpretation 2 has used sources similar to source B. It does say at the end there, therefore the writers have different reference materials. So this scored level 1, 2 marks because there were no details offered from either the sources or the interpretations to support this claim. And I think this is a really nice exemplar to use with your students if you are supporting them with that first approach. You can show them here, there's a clear reason, but it gets 2 marks because it doesn't have that supporting detail. And then you could ask students to improve the answer to get 4 marks. So to add the supporting information from the sources and the interpretations, supporting information to support the claim. So that's something that's, an activity that would be quite nice to do in class when you are working on this question and this skill. So for the second activity this evening, I'd like you to have a look in your delegate booklet. As I say, we're using the same interpretations and the mark scheme on pages 1 and page 3. But on page 4, you will find exemplar answer 3. So have a look, and Leon is going to put a poll up on the screen for you. So have a look at exemplar answer 3, and using the mark scheme, form a best fit judgment as to the level and the mark that you would give exemplar answer 3, and then just pop your ideas into the poll. Lovely. Okay, well, the majority, I think, have given this one a go. Oh no, we've got a few more coming in now, so I'll just give it a few more seconds for activity 2, exemplar answer 3. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results with you. So you can see here, the majority of you went for level 2, 4 marks. A few of you went for level 2, 3 marks. So let's have a look then at this answer, which I have on my next slide here, and you have a copy in your delegate booklets. I can confirm that this answer was given level 2, 4 marks. And what you can see here is that this candidate has used the same first approach, that the historians have given weight to different sources. They have matched interpretation 1 to source C and shown how the author of interpretation 1 has probably used, it says there, this means that the historian may have used a source like source C, which focuses on the use of propaganda. And then later on, whereas interpretation 2 focuses on the use of the police and links that interpretation or the view in that interpretation to the content of source B. And here we can see that this candidate has provided details from both the sources and the interpretations to support this explanation. So this achieved level 2, 4 marks. So you've got a good couple of exemplars there that you can use with your students to show them the importance of identifying the difference and then supporting with details from the sources and the interpretations. So let's move on then to what I'm going to call the chunky question, to question 3D, the interpretations essay. Question 3D is the culmination of the inquiry package. Students have worked with the sources. They've now got an understanding of the views in the two interpretations and why they're different. And now in question 3D, they are asked how convincing do they find interpretation 2? And we're going to continue looking at the question from last summer's Germany exam. How far do you agree with interpretation 2 about Nazi methods of controlling the German people in the years 1933 to 39? There are 3 key strands in the mark scheme which contribute to the judgment about interpretation 2. And in your delegate booklets, you have a copy of the mark scheme. I have it on a slide. I don't have the page number. I think it's on page 5, but do correct me in the chat if I'm wrong there. But if you take a look, if we look at level 4 of the mark scheme, what we are looking for in this answer is an explained evaluation reviewing the alternative views in coming to a substantiated judgment. We want students to have precise analysis of the interpretations, as shown, indicating how the differences of view are conveyed and deploying this material to support the evaluation. Relevant contextual knowledge is precisely selected to support the evaluation, and then students are expected to come to an overall judgment which is justified, and the line of reasoning is coherent, sustained, and logically structured. There's no need for a student to introduce a third view. They just need to focus on the view in interpretation 2 and to use the view of interpretation 1 to challenge the view of interpretation 2. And if we look at the green there, relevant contextual knowledge is precisely selected to support the evaluation. There are no marks for students using knowledge that is not used to evaluate the interpretations. That's really important. So good answers identify the overall thrust of interpretation 2 and examine the details that combine to create that view. Contextual knowledge is interwoven into this, confirming or challenging these details. Interpretation 1 should also be analysed, either used to challenge interpretation 2 or examined independently. The most common weakness here is to use the interpretations as a springboard for an essay offering the student's own judgment on the inquiry. There are no marks available for AO1 or AO2, so as I was saying, any use of contextual knowledge needs to be used to support the view in the interpretation or to challenge the view in the interpretation. What students mustn't do is kind of turn this into kind of an agree-disagree essay, like on paper 1 and paper 2. A second common weakness is to omit contextual knowledge and to present the details from the interpretations as evidence that the interpretation is correct, or to simply state that they know these details are true. Contextual knowledge is a strand within the mark scheme, but it must be linked to the evaluation of the interpretations rather than being offered as an answer to the inquiry or as a standalone section of information. So here on this slide, we have a copy of the question 3D mark scheme. And I think it's worth kind of looking at the incremental challenge kind of going through the levels. We've again highlighted in different colours level 4 for you, because what we're really looking for in this answer is an explained evaluation of the views coming to a judgment. So that judgment is there. We're looking for analysis of the interpretations, and we are looking for contextual knowledge that's precisely selected. But if you have a look at level 3, the difference here is where it says relevant contextual knowledge is used directly to support the evaluation rather than precisely selected. So do take some time to have a look through the mark scheme and look at kind of the keywords, the differences across the levels. So we're going to return now to last summer to the Germany paper. We'll stick with the Germany paper again. And we are going to look at an exemplar answer. So in your delegate booklets, you will find the full answer. We've got exemplar answer 4. And this on the slide here is just an extract, which I'm going to talk through to show you where this student got their marks. But you will find the full exemplar in the delegate booklet on pages 6 to 9. I can share with you now that this exemplar answer was given level 4, 15 marks and 4 marks for SPAG. So exemplar answer 4, level 4, 15 marks and 4 marks for SPAG. So let's have a look at this answer then. So let's first of all take the extract that I have on the slide here. And what we are looking for is that purple element of the mark scheme where the student is evaluating the view in interpretation 2. And we can see here that opening sentence, I agree with interpretation 2 to a large extent. I know that Hitler introduced a variety of laws and practices in order to keep control. So they've understood that this is the view in interpretation 2, that the Nazis kept control of the German people by using violence, by using terror, police states. In this case, they've phrased it as laws and practices. Later on, they go back to the evaluation. This shows that the law had a huge part in controlling people. I also agree with interpretation 2 when considering the impact of the law on banning political parties. And then you can see again, threaded throughout the paragraph, more evaluation. Therefore, it is clear that the law played a major role in allowing him to control people and parties, consequently allowing the Nazi Party to gain more support. So there is a consistent evaluation, a consistent linking back to this view in interpretation 2 that the laws and practices were used to keep control. There is specific references to the details within the interpretations to support this. And we can see these highlighted in yellow. When considering the phrase, the police could also imprison people without trial. Later on, they've quoted from the interpretation as well. It was against the law to belong to any political party. And there's precise contextual knowledge also used to evaluate the interpretation. I know from my own knowledge that Hitler abolished trial by jury. Instead, he left the decisions up to the judges, who were forced to join the Nationalist Socialist League for the maintenance of the law if they wanted to continue practicing. Some beautifully precisely selected knowledge here. One judge, Roland Friesler, was renowned for his trials. 90% of the defendants who faced trial before him received the death penalty. Moreover, in some cases, Hitler took it upon himself to decide the subject's penalty. So what this candidate has done here in this extract, if we link it back to the mark scheme, there is that consistent evaluation of the view, that consistent reference back to the view that's in interpretation 2. They are using the details from the interpretation to support that evaluation. And then they are using their contextual knowledge as well. In this case here, in this extract, they are using their contextual knowledge to agree with the view in interpretation 2. So we can see here in this extract, there's, some excellent analysis, evaluation, and use of contextual knowledge. As I say, this is just an extract from exemplar answer 4. Do take some time to have a look at the full exemplar answer in the delegate booklet. And there I'm sure you will agree that it's a fantastic answer, and you'll see why it got 15 marks for SPAG. If we then move on to the second extract from this answer, we can see here that evaluation continues. There was a clear focus on the overall view. However, there may be certain aspects of interpretation 2 that force me to only partially agree with its sentiments. It may be argued that the law was not used to completely control the German people, and that it instead was a facade for Hitler to arrest those he simply saw as undesirables. Therefore, it may be argued that the main way of controlling people was by simply using brute force. So they are starting there, again, they're carrying on their evaluating interpretation 2. And what we can see here is more precisely selected knowledge to support this evaluation. I know that 150,000 people were put under protective arrest in 1933, showing that Hitler simply used force and did not consider the law. And the feedback, which I've added to this slide from the principal examiner's report, this extract shows good evaluation of interpretation 2. There are regular references to the content of interpretation 2, and precise details from contextual knowledge are used to both confirm and challenge the view offered in the interpretation. So as I say, a really good answer to have a look at there in your teams to see that consistency and a level 4 response. So some more feedback from the summer 2024. Most students understand that the question 3D mark scheme requires them to evaluate interpretation 2, analyse both interpretations, and at levels 3 and 4 indicate the difference in the interpretations. Consequently, the best responses remain focused on the interpretations throughout the answer. Examiners can sometimes identify details from the interpretations being used, but if this is presented as the student's own knowledge, it cannot be credited as analysis of the interpretations. Higher level responses make regular references to details within the interpretations. When the answer discusses interpretation 2, then interpretation 1, before offering a judgment, there is a risk that the student shows little sense of evaluation until the end. So it's important there for the higher level responses to have that evaluation going, threaded throughout their answer. Higher level responses identify how the authors created different impressions by their choice of language, tone, emphasis, and selection of details. This was seen in comments such as details in the interpretation are all positive, the language is entirely negative, and this interpretation has a more balanced view as it mentions both positive and negative aspects. It's worth noting there that this selection of, when the student decides to analyse the selection of the choice of language, tone, emphasis, this doesn't have to be a lot. It can just be a couple of sentences within the answer. Okay, so let's have a look at our final exemplar answer in the delegate booklet for activity 3. You've got the interpretation still on page 1, the mark scheme and the indicative content. And on pages 10 and 11, you will find exemplar answer 5. And Leon is going to put the poll up on the screen for us. So when you've had a chance to read through that answer, decide, are you going to give it level 2? Are you going to give it level 3? What mark would you give it? And pop your responses, pop your answer kind of into the poll there. Thank you, Mark. Yep, just picking up on some of the questions. People have asked why exemplar answer 4 didn't get 16 out of 16. And yes, it's because this candidate didn't indicate how the differences of view are conveyed. So if you ask that question, do have a look at Mark's response in the chat there. I will carry on with the presentation here. Okay, lovely. I'm conscious of time, so I am going to end the poll here. So thank you for those of you who got involved, and I'll share the responses now. We can see that the majority of you put this answer into level 2. 5 marks was very popular, 8 marks then, and then 6. Okay, so let's have a look at this answer here on the slide. I can share with you that this exemplar answer 5 was given level 2, 6 marks. And we've highlighted the extract that's on the slide here. As you know, you've got the full answer in your delegate booklet, but the highlighting matches the highlighting on the mark scheme. So the feedback from the principal examiner's report, The student has understood interpretation 2, but the analysis lacks a focus on the interpretations. It lacks a focus on, there's a few references to interpretation 2, and there's no use of interpretation 1. There is some relevant contextual knowledge included here. For example, the Nuremberg laws, and we have that underlined in green, are a valid example of control through the use of law, but the details about 1932 are out of period. So using a best fit approach, this answer was given level 2, 6 marks. So using the best fit, the evaluation of the interpretations and judgment was given level 2. The analysis of the interpretations was given level 1, and the contextual knowledge was low level 2, which using best fit, as I say, brings the answer out at level 2, 6 marks, and there are 3 marks for SPAG. And I'd just like to draw your attention here to your delegate booklet, where we have added an additional exemplar for exemplar. It's called exemplar answer 6, and you'll find it on pages 12 to 16. And that's a really good one to go away and have a look at. It's been colour coded for you, and it was awarded level 4, 16 out of 16. So there is a fantastic answer there for you to go away and have a look at and to use with your departments for your own benefit, and also with your students. So the feedback from the summer regarding this question is that every level of the mark scheme focuses on the interpretations. Therefore, an answer where the student offers their own views on the inquiry can be credited for relevant contextual knowledge, but cannot progress very far, as the knowledge should be used in the evaluation of interpretation 2, and the answer is not addressing the other strands of the mark scheme. Furthermore, except for level 1, every level of the mark scheme refers to interpretations, plural, and students who only refer to one interpretation are again limiting their mark. Students often use the interpretations as stimulus points for an answer presenting their own views, and they have lengthy sections of their own knowledge, and as we said earlier, this should be avoided. Sometimes they treat the interpretations as sources and try to evaluate them for reliability. And do take some time to have a look at this table, where you can kind of compare the average marks on this question for the different grades. But what I want to do is just move on now, and because I'm a little bit behind schedule, and think about how we can support our students through our teaching to do well on this question. Here on this slide, there is a link to some guidance on the Edexcel website to help students with answering question 3D. So do make use of that link. And I'm not going to worry about the chat idea at the moment, but just to give you some ideas here for teaching interpretations, ideas and strategies. I think history is all about interpretations, and with paper 3, this is important. Therefore, one of the key advice we can give you from Edexcel is to make interpretations a key part of your lesson. Think about using a section of an interpretation, just a view, could be a single sentence, could be just a couple of sentences. Think about using them as a plenary or as a starter. Get students to discuss them, get students to use their knowledge to agree, disagree, to be thinking about the view, to be using their knowledge to support it in terms of evaluation and analysis. By making the interpretations and the viewpoints expressed in them a key part of teaching this topic, students will become more confident in analysing and evaluating interpretations in an exam question. If you have the option, invite another history teacher or humanities teacher into the class to express their opinion. You know, you can have different views. This is something I do quite a lot in intervention sessions where, you know, 2 teachers will have a bit of a debate. The students kind of join in and then they reach a decision regarding how far they agree with the viewpoint, whichever teacher is kind of leading the session. For weaker students, you could provide a score system or a multiple choice option of phrases. Challenge students to justify their judgment verbally. This could be followed up by holding a debate with the second teacher, where 2 contrasting views could be explored further. You could introduce interpretations on other topics, And for example, find an article about a well-known current affairs event and ask students if they agree with the viewpoint or not. There's some more ideas here where you, again, getting students to make a documentary using a bit of technology. If you've got access to technology in your classroom, get them to kind of share their view and support it, to interview people with other views, setting up a debate, as we just mentioned. And here's some sheets that are available to you in the Paper 3 teaching guide, which is linked on the next slide for you, where you can kind of use this structure to give students the two interpretations, get them to identify the main views and the difference, and then get them to kind of think about how they could work through the demands of question 3D. So hopefully these documents can give you some ideas for how you can help students kind of work through the thought process and then to answer these questions. As I say, the Paper 3 guide is here. There is a link here to the Paper 3 guide where you'll find information on setting the scene, the common barriers and pitfalls, teaching the content, and teaching the historical skills for Paper 3. And all the paper guides have been updated to reflect the 2025-2026 amends. There's a few other links on this slide for you where you can find a link to the Paper 3 marking training, which took place before Christmas. There's a recording there and some more links to student-friendly command words, guidance and revision tips. And updated student walkthroughs will be available towards the end of March, early April, and Paper 3 obviously will be in there. So I'll have a look at the questions. I'm conscious of time, I have 1 more minute, so I'll just run through the next few slides and then I'll have a look at the questions in the chat, so feel free to stay around if you've got a burning question for myself or the marks. Hopefully we've met the objectives of this session. You had a look at how the interpretations are assessed across Paper 3. You now know what students did well and where there's room for improvement. And do have a look at that Paper 3 guide for some strategies for teaching interpretations moving forward. On this slide, we have some links here of how you can access and get in contact with Mark Batchy through email, through phone, booking an appointment with him electronically, all on that slide. If you'd like to find out more about Pearson's professional development courses, use the link on this slide. And as I say, do give us feedback, do tell us what would be really helpful for your teaching, what you would need from Edexcel, to help you, your departments, your students, and all of that will be taken into consideration when we plan future events.